We good? Hey, what's up, everybody? How we doing tonight? Welcome to MZBCU Live. We've been doing this live stream stuff on Wednesdays for the last couple months now, and so it's been a little crazy. Normally on Wednesday nights we got worship, we got some teaching, but we're going to do something a little different tonight. I've invited my friend Brandon to come. We're going to talk about race and reconciliation, a nice light-hearted topic for the evening.
Yeah.
We've been sharing that we're going to be doing this for a while. We've got a lot of folks responding, so we might have a lot of new folks watching tonight. So I want to take some time right now just to introduce ourselves. My name is Eric Davis. I'm the youth pastor here at Mount Zion. Been here for almost 6 years now. Get to work with my wife every day. She's the interim children's minister here, which is a lot of fun. She's got our middle school girls small group meeting together tonight, watching that. But Brandon, go ahead and introduce yourself for us.
Yeah, so my name is Brandon Allen. I'm the student pastor over at Mount Vernon, the other mountain in the area. And so man, I've been there since August. So I'm not a year just yet, man, but I'm loving every minute of it. It's been great. It's been fun getting to know everybody. Still learning. You know, I still find a new road around New Hope every week, it seems like. So still learning the lane and loving it. And I'm from Louisiana originally, so I'm right next door. I'm not like a northerner coming down south, so I'm just I'm right across the street. So
you didn't have to learn to like crawfish like I did. You were just born into it.
The only thing different for me was going from parish to county.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're weird, and we say parish is for everything.
Yeah.
And we're the only weirdos in the rest of the nation that say that. So it was weird for me to.
I got a speeding ticket one time in Louisiana, and the ticket talked about the parish, whatever parish it was. And the policeman, I remember, he had a scorpion tattoo on one forearm and a shark tattoo on the other one. I was like,
that's weird.
Yeah, I'm in a different place right now.
You're definitely in a different
place.
Crazy. Welcome to Louisiana, people. That's how we roll over there.
Hey, like I said, tonight we're going to talk about race and reconciliation. And reconciliation is really the restoration of relationships. And so tonight we're going to focus on the restoration of relationships between races. When God created us and created this world, and in all of his creativity, he laid out this incredible spectrum of colors, and he never meant for us to be divided, but that's where we find ourselves now. For the last 400-600 years, whatever, we've had an incredible division when it comes to race, especially in the United States. And so you think that over time it would go away, but it hasn't. It's manifested itself in different ways, and so that's been a real issue. And so there's a heart issue, there's a sin issue, and we're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about focusing on restoring that relationship between races. And I don't think that this one conversation between the two of us is going to solve.
No, but it's a great starting point. It is
That's right.
And I'm excited. You know, we talked about this, and for everybody else to know. You know, like this is a no hold punches. This is not like we're going to come and beat around the bush. We want to take the gloves off and talk about some hard things and some hard facts, and some hard truths that the church needs to hear. That as the body of Christ, that we can't beat around the bush. I think we have a history of want to play things safer and be censored, and I think it's hurt us. And I think sometimes we need the raw truth. Even in the gospel, right? Like, as preachers, we're always told to just give them Jesus. And a lot of preachers, we call it, the cotton candy, like to preach cotton candy and all fluff. And, we're going to give you the meat spiritually and from a worldview tonight as far as like what's going on in our nation. So.
That's right. Absolutely. I love that. The reason that we're doing this tonight, it seems like 2020, let's just say, has not been the best.
It has not been the best.
Started out with Kobe's death, then it gets into wildfires in Australia.
Oh,
then
gosh.
COVID hit, so we had killer hornets, and then we had, in the middle of all this, there's these three significant murders that happened. The first one in February was Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia.
Right.
And he was jogging through a neighborhood, and these guys thought that he looked like somebody who'd been breaking in, and so they took it upon themselves
to have a citizen's arrest.
All right. And obviously he did not want to go with them, and
they had the right to protect himself.
He was protecting himself, and in the middle of protecting himself, one of the guys in the back of the truck thought that he was threatened, and so he shot him in cold blood. There's video of that online. Watching the video is sobering. It is tough to see.
Yeah.
And so that was, and then everything was quiet on that for like a month, and then all of a sudden it blew up with a viral video. The next one after that was Breonna Taylor.
Yeah.
Breonna Taylor was in Louisville. She was at home in bed with her husband or boyfriend or somebody, and the police were executing a no-knock warrant on her house, meaning they did not have to knock or announce themselves. They busted in. The gentleman who was legally licensed to carry a firearm thought that their house was being broken into. He got up to protect himself and Breonna, and she ended up getting shot 8 times. And so, and you can read a lot more about that. There's a lot of questions about the events of that night. He was in a grand jury dismissed the charges against him, and so that speaks loudly as to the accounts of that night and what happened. So Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then most recently George Floyd in Minnesota. George Floyd was suspected of trying to pass a $20 bill, a counterfeit bill or something like that, and he was detained and did not. The police officer detained him, sat on his neck with his knee for 9 minutes, and he passed away. They had a couple of autopsies. And the family's private autopsy said it was definitely asphyxiation.
Correct.
And so those are these 3 events that are
just recent, right? That's within the last couple of months. It's not even bringing it back up the ones from last year. You get into both of them, Gene, or even going back farther than that. And this is recent. This is within the last couple of months. Just the mainstream ones. This is only what we know as of in public, or we are talking about, which there are countless others, and it just breaks everyone's heart, and it's beginning to break other people's hearts too. I think for the most part, in the past, have been a little skeptical or saying wanted to believe that these things were not as what they were, and I think now a lot of people in America, a lot of our white brothers and sisters are finally beginning to understand and see we're broken, we're hurting, our country is sick, and we want to make a difference. And I think that's why this conversation is so important, is to make sure that in 5 to 10 years we're not having this same conversation.
Right, absolutely.
So I think this is a huge step for us as a nation to move forward. I think we're in a good place now to where people are willing more than ever to listen, and I think that's a good point. So
absolutely. I want to start out, and these verses were on my mind as we were preparing for tonight. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. And then towards the end of that section, verse 11, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore, it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. I love this passage. Paul's saying, be imitators of God, first of all. God created us in his image. All colors, shapes, sizes, created us in his image. So we're going to be imitators of God in that he's going to love his creation, so we love his creation. We're going to walk in love as Christ loved us. Christ gave himself up, and so in imitating him, we put ourselves second, and we look for the benefit of others. And then he says, expose what's dark. Expose what's dark. And there are dark corners of our heart that need to be exposed. We could do a conversation on all kinds of different topics. And tonight, that dark corner that we're going to tackle is racism. And then he says, awake, O sleeper. We want to be woke. That's a good thing, to awaken to the struggle that's going on around us, the struggle that our black brothers and sisters are facing. We don't want to stick our heads in the sand and let it continue to happen. So
let me add to that. So I think that a lot of people, I've had people ask me in the last couple of days of, well, why, even in a not so direct way, what I'm hearing is, why is this our problem, or why is the church, or why are we not handling this the right way as a church, and how can we handle it? When we talk about racial reconciliation, I think a lot of people don't understand, like, that is biblical. That's what this is something that God has called us to do as Christians. And so if you don't, know what I'm talking about, let me direct you to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 17 through 20 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, and look, new things have come." Everybody knows that verse. Pushing forward, everything is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and he has committed the message of reconciliation to us. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, certain that God is appealing through us. We plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. And basically, God is telling us that when we become Christians, when we become renewed in our faith and our spirit, he has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That reconciliation is not an option. That as Christians, when people see us, they have to see reconciliation through our life. And that can look through your own personal thing, reconciling personal problems that you've had with other people. Or as Christians, we have to reconcile the brokenness. We can't be Christians and lovers of Jesus and hate other people and not stand up for what is wrong. For what is right, and not call out what is wrong. Like, an unloving Christian is an oxymoron. And it's the truth. And we have to make sure that we are reconciling in every way, not just some ways, in every way that is possible. And so racial reconciliation is a part of that scripture. And so it's important for us as Christians to be on the front line of reconciliation, even on a racial standpoint.
That's right. That's right. And one of the ways that we reconcile is we open our ears to viewpoints that are different than ours, or experiences that are different than ours.
Yeah.
One of the problems that we have in white America is that if something doesn't fit our narrative and our experience, then it's not true.
Yeah.
And so, and I was in that position for a long time, and it wasn't until I said, I need to start listening to other folks that I started to understand what was going on. And so, I'm still learning. I'm still listening. I don't know this understanding here. I don't know what it's like to be black in America.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to share a little bit of your story and maybe some of your experiences with us to help us understand what it has been like for you.
Yeah. So I'll start off with this. And so I think a lot of people who aren't black, which understandably don't really see through our lens and see what we have to see or experience or think about on a daily basis. And so the first thing I can think of is my son. I think about my 2-year-old son. His name is Emmett. Beautiful little mixed kid. Love that kid to death. Hairs all over the place. Little ball of fire. Love that dude. And I can remember a couple months ago, or when the Ahmaud Arbery thing happened, immediately my mind went to a dark place of thinking about my son just jogging. He could be playing sports or just, trying to stay fit, unlike his dad, and can be jogging. And I mean, just to think about my son leaving the house to go on a jog and never coming home, not because he did anything wrong, but because someone thought that he fit a stereotype, or he fit a profile of somebody that looks like they can be doing a crime. And that breaks my heart to think that I can't put a bubble around my son and not let him live life. But his life may be looked at as a threat just because his skin color is different than somebody else's. That's a thing, a fear of mine that I have every single day. And I dread having to have that conversation with my son the day that I have to sit him down, and we call it in the black community the talk, right? And a lot of people think the talk is like the birds and the bees, but in the black community, the talk is a conversation that you have to have with your kid to let them know that people will see you as a threat because of the color of your skin. And we have to talk to them and show them how to handle interaction with cops to make sure that they don't be perceived as a threat, that they have to keep their hands on the steering wheel, or not yell, or not have a threatening tone, or to make sure that you're being extra careful just so you can make it home that night. That's a legit, real conversation that we have in the black community with our kids. And a lot of my white friends and white parents that I've told that story to, like, are baffled that we have to have that conversation. They had no idea, you know, and I'm like, what to us is normal. You know, that's a normal thing for me. You know, I can think about, you know, other instances where, you know, I can remember me and my wife were like getting married, and hearing stories of her parents having to, or her parents losing friends because of me and my wife's relationship. Never met me, they don't know me from Adam, but because I wasn't a white guy, that was enough for them. They would rather my wife go marry some low-life white guy, but just because he was white, that would have been a better thing for them. They don't know that I'm educated, I have a college degree, I love my son, I'm here every day, a little overweight, but that's not the point. Like all those things, but like I'm here, but they can't see past my color. Those are things that I see with every day. Me and my wife are in public, and you know, people staring at us, you know, in disgust and confusion, and why in the world would, you know, this black guy and this white girl be together? Things as far as like growing up in the community I grew up in, a very mixed and multicultural community. You know, knowing that even though some friends may let me come to their house, you know, their parents really didn't agree with me. Or having some friends who they knew for a fact that if they ever liked a black guy or wanted to date a black guy, they would be disowned. You know, like knowing those things and seeing those things every single day was huge. And you know, and I think one of the craziest things, and we talked about earlier about overt and covert. You know, overt being, you can see racism, and you know, the KKK and these people say we hate black people, but I think the covert racism, the things that you don't see every day, that's not there to the naked eye unless you really see it, are things that are the hardest to deal with.
Right.
And so I know for me, like growing up in Louisiana, and we just talk about how we're conditioned to live with racism in our everyday life. And growing up in Louisiana, I mean, where I grew up, I mean, literally, there's plantations 5-10 minutes away from my house.
Right.
You know, like growing up knowing there's Confederate flags just roaming around, where this side of that side literally fought to keep me and my people, and my loved ones and my ancestors literally as slaves. They wanted that. Right. One of the funniest, when I found this out a couple years ago, I say funny, but it's really sad. There's a place in Colfax, Louisiana, which is about 20 minutes from where I grew up, or not where I grew up, where I was at my last church. Right. So there's an actual memorial in Colfax that is a monument for what is called the Colfax Massacre. So basically, the Colfax Massacre happened on April 13th, Easter Sunday, in 1873. So basically what happened is these group of white militia surrounded this group of black men and basically massacred anywhere from 50 to 150 African Americans. And within the process of doing that, 3 white men lost their life. Okay. In Colfax, to this day, there is a monument to honor those 3 white men that lost their life.
Golly.
That honors them, not for the 150. There's nothing to represent the 150 men that lost their life that day. Many who had surrendered before they were slaughtered. Right. But because these 3 white men, one who a lot of people believe actually was hitting the crossfire from his own men, died. But there's a monument to this day that it still stands to honor those 3 men that committed that heinous act, and that was celebrated even to this day.
Are there conversations in that town about that monument?
That is not. It's a majority black town. It's the crazy part. But like, there's things like that all over Louisiana where we were conditioned to just live with these monuments and these things where, you know, that were praised by a certain group of people but oppressed another group of people. Yeah. And it's things like that now that I'm gonna have to even go back and like undo and unlearn how I just live with that, because they told me that this is what we celebrate and I'm supposed to go along with it. Right. And so those are things like, you know, the things that we have to go through, and I went through personally growing up in Louisiana, that dealt with covert racism that wasn't really out there for me to see, but once you peel back layers, you begin to realize something's really not right.
And I think that covert racism, you mentioned things that you were conditioned and learned as you were growing up. I think that covert racism is something that we are taught inadvertently growing up, and it's enforced by the imaginary boundaries around our towns. Like This section is for this group of people. This part of town is for that group of people. You go into that part of town as long as you're driving through there. You don't stop. I mean, there's those kinds of things that are enforced or reinforced in our mind. There's there are faces and sounds that we make when we come across a part of a different culture that we don't like. So, if we see somebody driving by with their loud music on, we go, "Oh my gosh, turn that down! I don't want to hear your music." And it's those little covert things in our lives that we are conditioned to and reinforced that are conditioned and reinforced in our minds as we're growing up, and it's those parts that take root in our hearts. And when big things happen, like these 3 murders or the hundreds of thousands of murders that have happened before this, we don't jump on board and say this is wrong. We say, what were they doing wrong? It's not the people who murdered these people were wrong. It's like, I bet they were doing something wrong. They were doing something they shouldn't have.
Yeah, and the sad thing about it, like, we begin to justify the life of somebody, or somebody losing a life, down to a problem, or something they did wrong. Like, their sin justified them being murdered.
Right.
And there's a lot of people who, I love this pastor's name by Brian Ritz, and he wrote a book, and he talks about how in Insider Outsider, that there's this psychologist that has these steps that we like to call the levels of communication, and he talks about how there's pretty much 2 levels of communication that are like the most important. And when something bad happens or a murder happens, it's usually police brutality, someone loses a life. The black culture, the black people in America tend to run to emotion, which is level 4. Where our white brothers and sisters tend to hang out at level 2, which is the facts.
Right.
And so, if you're younger watching this, if you're married, you agree with me, fellas. We make this mistake a lot. When our wife is upset, when they're at level 4, we tend to do the dumb thing of coming at their emotion at a level 2 fact thing, right? And they're upset and they're emotional, and we just want to fix the problem. So we just say, well, why don't you just do X, Y, and Z? And what do they always tell us? I don't want you to fix the problem right now. I just want you to be there for me.
Right.
And so a lot of times, that's what's perceived and what's being said with that is that when people, in your mind, you're trying to justify in your mind to make sure that the world isn't as bad as it is. So let's say, well, maybe that cop had a reason for doing that. And you try to come at it from a factual standpoint. And by doing that, you're telling, without saying, I really don't care about his life because it was justified at why he got killed.
Right.
And so we have to do a better job of understanding and saying that nothing, no crime, no nothing, death should not be the final act. Like, that shouldn't be it. Even if he did resist arrest, it's you saying that you can't say that justifies him dying. Right. Just like if, a student or somebody's parent or whatever the case may be, I hope that death is never the final thing. I can't just say, well, they deserve to die.
Right.
And so we have to make sure that we're not approaching those situations by saying, when we're trying to justify what happened, we do that at the cost of making people feel like that life was not worth saving.
Right. And then on the other end of that, you have whatever the media reports on the death, they'll say, well, they'll list all these accomplishments. Articulate, he was academically successful, athletically gifted. He didn't deserve it. It's like, those are not qualifiers for how well you should live or how long you should live. Right. It's Paul says, 1 Corinthians 15, death is the final enemy that'll be defeated.
Yeah.
And when we read that, a lot of times we're looking ahead like, oh yeah, we're gonna, death is gonna be defeated. But what that verse applies presently in the fact that death is the enemy.
Yeah.
Death is the enemy. And for a believer, when you hear about someone dying, that is a heartbreaking thing because they don't get to hear the gospel anymore. They have no opportunity to be redeemed. They have no opportunity to be reconciled to God. They die lost. And so even your most hated enemy, when you hear that they're dead, that should break your heart because death is the enemy of God. It's not It's not what God created this world to be like. He created life. He created eternal life. Death is the result of the brokenness of the world. And so when we hear about death, no matter if it is someone overseas, no matter if it's someone here, no matter if they were academically gifted or if they were socially dysfunctional, death is the enemy.
Yes.
Death is the enemy. And so we can't start from a place of did they deserve it? We start from a place of were they created in the image of God? That's where as Christians, that is where we start.
That's it.
And if they were created in the image of God, which is everybody,
Everyone.
death is not final. Death is not where we go. We
Right.
don't celebrate that no matter what they've done. We mourn that death.
That's good.
In these conversations about covert racism,
Yeah.
a lot of times we talk about systemic racism. Systemic racism is it's not overt. It is the way our society is structured to disadvantage the black community. And I wondered if you might explain a little bit of how that looks, because a lot of times that's a trigger. And we're going to talk about a couple other triggers that make the hair on the back of your neck stand
Oh, my
up.
goodness.
I want to talk about systemic racism for a second.
So let me start by saying this. This is probably one of the most depressing things because it's when you begin to research and realize and see a lot of the ways that our system has been created to keep a group of people with a different color of skin. That's it. Oppressed or keep them behind the 8 ball. It is very sad and makes you lose all hope in the society that you live in and you call home. So I'll give you this analogy before we dive into it. So imagine, Eric, that me and you are 2 football coaches on 2 different teams, okay?
Right.
And let's say that I pay off a ref, and I'm like, hey, I want to win this game. You're going to help me win it. And we go into this game. Ball's kicked off first half. We're going. And I get every single call. You can't move the ball. I mean, every time you make a pass, a penalty's been called, whatever. And I mean, I'm just running up the score. I am beating the brakes off of you. And we go into halftime. The score is 90-0, Eric. I mean, you go into I go in the locker room high-fiving, happy. You go into the locker room. I mean, your players are distraught. They don't know what to do.
They want to go back out there.
They don't want to go back out there. They're
Yeah.
done. And at some point, you look and you see me and the ref walking in. And I say, hey, Eric, you know what I've been thinking, man? I was wrong. I paid the ref off. We were not fair. I'm sorry. So you know what? From now on, we're going to call this game fair.
Right.
All right. Every call's going to be great. It's going to be fine. We're going to have a great second half. I know the first half was kind of screwed up, but we're good now. We're good to go.
Right.
Right. And we go back out there ready to play. Are you going to be very happy to go out there and finish playing that game?
Absolutely not. But if people are going to be like, well, you're on the field.
Right.
You got a fair shot right now.
Right.
What's wrong? What's
And
the
so
problem?
that's a great illustration. The fact is, you're still down 90-0.
Right.
And so a lot of times people struggle with that because we live in a society where a lot of times we, as the minorities, black people in America, have been, cheated for so long. And then all of a sudden people say, hey, we're going to call the game fair now. We were so behind the 8 ball
Right.
that even though the second half, we're still going to go play, but we're so far behind. We have so much to overcome to even get back into the game.
Right.
And so a lot of people you got to get over slavery. You got to get over all those things. You just got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make it. When in reality, we were set up to fail in a system that doesn't want us to win. And even though we've made huge strides from where we were, I'll say it. I don't want to be a black guy back in the 60s, compared to where I am now, the freedoms that I have. We've come a long way. But we still have so far to go, but the playing field is still not even. So let's talk about some of those things that uneven the playing field in the beginning. That a lot of times the schools don't talk about, that the people who control the narrative don't want to talk about and acknowledge, have those things. So I'll give you a big one. So in 1986, we have this big thing called the war on drugs, or what people call it today, the crack laws. All right. If you don't know what the crack laws are, basically, this was Reagan's way of starting a war on drugs to try to get crack cocaine off of the streets. And so basically, crack cocaine was flooding or being flooded into black neighborhoods all across America, and they basically said they made the law that crack cocaine will be heavily convicted compared to any other drug in America.
Right.
So majority of this crack is being sold in the poor parts of the nation because it's really cocaine being broken down to crack. And basically this is the laws that were passed. It said that a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence with no parole would be if you were found with 5 grams of crack cocaine. Okay? That is equivalent, you get 5 years mandatory minimum if you found 500 grams of powder cocaine. So there's a 100-to-1 disparity of the difference.
Yeah.
So a cheaper, less pure drug, 5 grams, you would get 5 years mandatory minimum with no parole. To a richer drug that were used in the whiter parts of the world or the whiter parts of America, 500 grams, 5 to 500 grams, you got the same amount of sentence. And so basically what happened is we saw a lot of broke black people who were selling drugs, who were using drugs, these poor parts of the world or in America, being shipped off to jail at high rates. And so we had a huge emptiness of fathers in the black community. You see a lot of violence come in. There's no leadership. There's no nothing because most of our community and our leaders were shipped off into prison for long periods of time for using a drug that it took 100 times more for someone with more money to use another drug to get the same amount of time.
Yeah, and there wasn't any recovery that went along with it. It was you go into jail, you get back out of jail, you're in the same position you were in. There was no recovery. There wasn't any therapy, counseling, treatment, any of that stuff. And then it was just this cycle. It was a cycle that flooding the jail. That
was a big thing that began to shift the jail system becoming much more predominantly black. Another thing that we talk about systemic racism is literally called redlining. If you don't know what redlining is, basically it's bankers and loan officers literally taking a map and drawing a red line around areas in a city that they refuse to give loans to. And so they would take these predominantly black areas and say that we will not give bank loans so these people can get home loans in these specific areas. And so you would see a lot of black people who aren't able to own their own homes, who aren't able to get loans. You had these banks who would use covert racism to keep black people from getting loans to be able to begin to build generational wealth and put them behind the 8 ball even more, where our white brothers and sisters were able to get ahead, get more loans, begin to own homes, begin to turn profit, and to begin to set up themselves up for success in the future.
Right.
And so redlining was a huge thing that to shift to shift how much property and who owns property in our nation. And then the last thing I'll talk about is voting laws. So even in Mississippi, I'll give Mississippi specifically. There's these things in Mississippi back in the day when segregation or after slavery ended and black people were trying to begin to see change for themselves. They would want to, and they realized that if I can vote, then I'm able to make a change. I can be able to get people who look like me in office to be able to make bills for me and care for me.
Right.
Well, our white brothers and sisters said, no, we don't like that. So they would literally do things like create poll taxes and create literacy tests that were created to where if you don't own land, if you didn't have money, which a lot of black people were poor, they couldn't pay poll taxes to vote.
Right.
Or they were very uneducated. They've been enslaved for hundreds of years. And so they would create these insane literacy tests that these black people would have to pass to even vote. And so they were keeping black people away from the polls to be able to keep in power who they wanted to keep in power. And this is something that our system allowed to happen that created this environment to where black people were getting pushed farther and farther behind as the nation was growing and becoming the nation that it is today.
Right.
And so a lot of systemic racism has been in the depths of who we are. But these are things you don't learn in school. These are things you're not taught. These are things that nobody talks about. And so when you see people or presidents and other things like that, and not try to get political at all, but just a reality of it. So when you hear people say, we want to make America great again, to a black person, what that says is, you want to go back to when we were not able to vote. You want to go back to when, we were,
Had separate bathrooms.
had separate bathrooms. Like, when you say make America great again, to us, we think about segregation. We think about being haunted. We think about being lynched. We think about all these bad things. And so to you want to go back to the glory days before all the social media and everything else. But that same sentence has such a different tone when it talks to us. And so I think a lot of people don't understand that when we hear that, it makes us cringe, because we understand that America was not great for us again. And so when people say, let's make America great again, to us, what you're speaking is, let's go back to when we ruled you.
Right.
And we had control over you.
Right.
Which I think a lot of white brothers and sisters don't have that intent, but they just don't know all the things and the history of what happened back then, because it's easier not to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's easier to change the narrative to say, well, it was never that bad, really.
Right. Absolutely. So there's all these barriers that have been set up historically. I think one of the crazy things that I've had to realize is, like, there are people alive today who experienced the civil rights movement, who had bricks thrown through their window, who were hunted. Who I was reading something that John Perkins wrote. He was talking about how he watched his dad get beaten. He was talking about how he was beaten, and I mean, like, people are alive today that experienced that. And it reminds me, it's not that long ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about 1860s.
Yeah.
We're not talking about this. We're talking about the 1960s, 1970s, the crack laws in the 1980s.
Yeah.
We're talking about all those things. The subprime mortgage crash that happened a decade ago. That hit communities of color particularly hard, because that was where black communities could go and get loans and get these subprime loans, and so that hit them hard. I mean, that's a decade ago, and it seems like for the last decade we've been talking about murders, and so there's just all this things in the system, and so people who wouldn't normally call themselves racist are part of the system.
And what we say, and people say all the time, like, racism didn't go away; it just transformed.
Yeah,
it morphed into something else. And so when people say, the people who do know a little bit about racism say, when they say racism, they think of dogs, they think of separate bathrooms, they think of all this stuff. And they're like, well, we don't have that. Racism is dead. We're like, no, it just it adapted over time and went into a different way. They understood that as times were changing, they couldn't continue to do racism that same way. So we have to find a different way to systemically keep people from being progressing with the world. And so it didn't go away, it adapted. And so we have to find the ways. I think now our white brothers and sisters are starting to see how that racism has adapted to other forms. And that's why we're having these tough conversations, because people are finally starting to see, like, I thought racism was gone or didn't exist. Right. But I see something here and I don't like it.
Right. And this leads into another one of those trigger phrases, white privilege. Oof. And that's when somebody hears that, that sends all kinds of red lights and sirens up, people's antenna goes up. Yeah. And they're like, I didn't have any privilege. I grew up poor. I didn't have any privilege. I had to work for everything I got. Yeah. It's like, well, you had the opportunity to do that. Yeah. And that's really where white privilege kind of finds its basis, like the opportunities that a person gets because of the color of their skin.
Man, that's so good. So I love how you started that off. And let's get this. I love not talking in proper English when I'm preaching. So I don't. Before I tell you what white privilege is, I'm gonna tell you what it ain't. All right. And so I know it's not proper English. If English teachers out there, you're cringing.
That's me.
Before I tell you what it is, I'm gonna tell you what it ain't. All right. White privilege is not racism. Okay. And so don't get defensive. We love to jump into our corners, and that's how we get divided. Don't get divided on me. White privilege doesn't mean that you're racist. Mm-hmm. It's not something you signed up for. Just like I don't remember, before my mother had me, they handed me a thing, hey, you want to be black or white in this life? I couldn't control that. God created me who He wanted me to be. God created you who you wanted to be. And I'm not asking you to be ashamed of who you are. That's not of your color, your skin. You can't control that. So don't feel like you signed up for it, or you're probably not even something that you want. Like, a lot of you hear white privilege and immediately feel shame. Don't feel shame for being white, all right? Mm-hmm. I don't want you to feel shame for being white. So white privilege is not racism. It's not something that you ask for or you even endorse. White people, don't think of themselves of being white. Think about that. So, like, not having to be aware of your ethnicity is a privilege in America. Mm. You not having to wake up every day and think about being white when you walk out the door, is a privilege that a lot of people don't have in America. Everything I see through lenses. I see through a black lens. Why? Because there's some things that I can't do that my white brothers and sisters can do. I talk to some of our staff members where, and they do some things, and I'm like, man, and we joke about it, that's some white people stuff. I can't do that. Like, for instance, like if you want to buy a house, Eric, and you see a house that you like, and you're like, man, that's a nice house. You can literally walk up to that house, like in the middle of the day, look into the window and look at the house, whatever the case may be, and be fine. I could never do that as a black person. And in my mind,
You'd end up on the Columbus Facebook
I would
watch
end up
page.
on the Facebook, the Columbus watch page. This big black dude, 6'2" black dude was creeping in somebody's house. Because when people see me, automatically my skin color in the society that we live in the system that we have, automatically associates my skin color with crime.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I'm not able to do something. You can be put over by a cop. My father-in-law who's watching, who was telling us about this time where, back before he knew Jesus, he was, living in Memphis, and he's like, I was in one of those nights, I'm in the back of the police car, and I'm like giving this cop a what for, and like, I'm cursing him out, doing these things, and the cop, it was more of a funny story. So the cop, he was like, "What'd you say?" He'd lean up, and the cop was slamming his brakes, and he would just go flying. And he'd get back up, cursing about all this stuff, and police said, "What'd you say?" He'd lean up, do it again, boom, and the police stopped. And so me and my wife listened to this story, and I was like, yeah, I'd be dead right now. I was like, I would be gotten beaten or like more charges thrown on me. Like all those things.
It's like
goes to white privilege. Yeah.
It's like the protesters in Michigan who were protesting the closing of the state.
Yeah.
They were marching around the state capitol with their ARs on their shoulder, and the police are just kind of standing there like,
gosh.
A group of black folks cannot do that.
It's a wrap, man. Like we're done, and we laugh about it, but the truth of it is like, and so let me tell you like so white privilege is that, but like let me give you an example of what that is. So like white privilege is like having two arms in a two-arm society. So like we live in a two-arm society, right? Being black or a minority in America is living in a two-arm society with one arm. We're basically having to adapt through everything in a system that we were not created to be like successful in.
Right.
We can still do things. Like I know people who only have one arm and they can still drive. They can still do things, but it's not as easy and it wasn't created for them. Right.
Yeah.
I play video games. I need two arms to play video games.
Yeah.
I know somebody with one who can play video games, but when whoever created that controller created that with somebody who had two thumbs.
Yeah.
And so you live in a world that was created for you to succeed in that task that it was created for.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we are put in a situation to where we're not equipped or we have one arm and we're living through a society that is created for somebody with two arms and we're handicapped going through life.
The two-arm folks would be like, well, look at Jim Abbott. He became a professional baseball pitcher with one arm. Why can't you do it
Why
too?
can't you do it? I'm like, you're missing the point.
Yeah, exactly. So the white privilege is one of those trigger words with systemic racism. There's another trigger phrase that I want to talk about, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And that's another one of those phrases that when you hear it, hair on the back of somebody's neck is going to stand up and they're going to respond with all lives matter or blue lives matter or whatever lives matter, And so that's one of those things I want to talk about. Like, explain to us what Black Lives Matter is, so that we can be a little more educated about
Right. So let me before I jump into that, let me go back and finish this white privilege thing that I forgot about. So, and I told you this earlier. For you who are upset about white privilege, I don't think white privilege is inherently wrong. I don't think any privilege is inherently wrong. We all have privilege, right? Like, compared to other people down the street, I could say that somebody can say that, well, you had two parents. I only had one. Well, somebody can say, well, Brandon, you had a parent at home. And so we all have privileges. Or compared to other countries, we are very privileged, right? I call them first world problems, right? Mom, the Wi-Fi is not working. Right. Or there are other people all over this world who are being bombed, who don't have running water. We all have privileges. So having privileges is not inherently wrong. Even Jesus, he was fully God and fully man. He's a man that literally was fully God. That's the ultimate privilege, if you ask me. Yeah. So the privilege is not wrong. Having privilege is not wrong. How you steward that privilege is.
That's good.
So if you have privilege and you don't steward that privilege well to help other people, then or take advantage of your privilege, that's when the privilege is a problem.
Right.
When we have privilege as a country or as a person, and as Christians, we see other people who have less than, and we're not doing everything we can to make it right. That's when our privilege becomes a problem.
Okay.
So white privilege is not inherently wrong. The problem is a lot of people ignore that white privilege or don't want to admit to it, and they take advantage of that white privilege and don't use that opportunity to make other things right in the world. That's where the privilege goes wrong. So,
Gotcha.
Black Lives Matter. I think a lot of people struggle with this idea, and I love this analogy. A lot of people have heard it by now. When we say Black Lives Matter and you say all lives matter, basically what we're trying to say is, and I love this analogy. Imagine there's 100 houses on a block, and one house is on fire, and police sirens are coming down, fire trucks are coming down to put out this fire in this one house. But you're standing outside your house screaming, "Oh, hey, all houses matter. Our house matters too." And we're like, "Yeah, your house does matter, but your house isn't on fire right now. I'm not going to spray your house when your house is not on fire. We need to focus on this one house that is on fire." Because if you say all houses matter, then this one house who's a part of all houses is on fire, then it should matter just as much as the other ones. And so when I say Black Lives Matter and somebody screams at me, all lives matter, I'm telling you, I'm like, yeah, we should be on the same side. That if you truly believe all lives matter, you see my life in danger or my people's life in danger, then you should be screaming at the people who are causing this problem to happen just as much as I am. Mm-hmm. But when, as a black man in America, when I'm saying Black Lives Matter and you scream all lives matter, what you're basically saying is you want to take the attention off the one group of people who are hurting at this particular time to say that your life is not more important than my life. Mm-hmm. And basically we're saying that you're right, we're all on the same team. And if you really believe all lives matter, then you see this life hurting, you should do everything you can to make sure that life is taken care of because all lives do matter. Right. And so Black Lives Matter should be a part of all lives matter. It shouldn't be a different movement. If your life is not in danger, we should do everything we can to protect the people whose lives are in danger. And that's when we say Black Lives Matter. We're not saying that white lives don't matter or any other life. We're saying this particular group of people are hurting and are being mistreated. And a part of the All Lives Matter movement, we should be focusing on this group of people because their lives matter just as much as everybody else's. Yeah. And so when you scream all lives matter to people who are saying Black Lives Matter, you're just trying to, we feel like you're taking the attention off of a specific group because you'd rather paint this large picture of everybody's important while negating the fact that this one group of people are hurting right now. Right.
And that's the thing. Like when people talk about Black Lives Matter, it is pointing the spotlight on this particular segment of the population that is in pain and needs attention brought to it. Mm-hmm. And more voices saying that, hey, these lives matter is a good thing. It's not taking any kind of special attention away from others. It's not, somebody said, it's not a pie just because we're paying more attention to Black lives right now.
Doesn't mean we're taking away.
Right. And so it's something to remember. Like, this is a time for us to advocate for people who are hurting.
Oh my goodness, man! This is a perfect time. What better time as a church to rally around a group of people who are hurting and who need our help, and say that all matter. You matter to Jesus, and we're going to show that you matter to Jesus by helping you in any way we can as the body of church, as the body of Christ, to help you understand that Jesus loves you. Not going to just say it. We're going to show that Jesus loves you by helping you out during this time. So perfect opportunity.
And we talked earlier about current events and the three recent murders that are pushing this narrative right now. I want to kind of jump ahead just a second, and talk about the protests that are happening right now. Yeah, I'd love to know, like, what are your thoughts seeing what's going on around the country right now with the protests?
So I'll tell you this, like, when all this stuff hit last week, I was on vacation actually with my wife and her family. And man, so many emotions that hit over me. And I really didn't know how to process it. But basically, I felt a lot of anger. I felt a lot of sadness. I felt alone. And I was a lonely black guy on a vacation full of white people. And I know they love me. The reality of it is they can try to identify with me, but they weren't going through what I went through as a black man in America. And so I felt alone. Like I felt like I couldn't really turn to anybody to mourn the feeling that I was feeling exactly how I felt. And a lot of times I felt hopeless. I felt like, Brandon, what's the point? You're at this predominantly white church trying to make a difference, trying to help bridge the gap between races and help this church grow. But is it really making a difference?
Right.
Is it easier for me just to pack up my family and run to a predominantly black church so I can fit in and be, feel more comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
But also I felt that I can't remember. It might have been Marcus Spears on the ESPN show. It might have been First Take. He said something so simple but yet so profound earlier this week. He said that I think this death in particular just broke America. It broke the spirit in America, and I began to see and have more conversations with people who don't look like me more than ever before. Mm-hmm. Friends that I've stood in my wedding texting me and having tough conversations that they were always uncomfortable to have. Mm-hmm. Friends that I've had, or people that I work with, or people I go to church with, like all these conversations were happening out of nowhere. I've had more racial conversations, great conversations in the last week than I probably had the last 4 or 5 years combined. Wow. And that's a lot, and so like it's been really good. And to watch these protests, the peaceful side of it, there's two parts of it. Mm-hmm. Watch the peaceful side of it, people from all 50 states, from all over the world, standing with our country to say this is wrong. Yep. We want to see a change. We're tired of watching the same thing happen. It's been some of the most amazing things I've ever seen. That's awesome. In our country. Yeah. Now the backside of it, and hear me close, because so many people love to point out about the bad protests, right? Looters. The looters, and they think that we approve that, and we understand as a black people, you're burning down the very things that we worked hard for. Right. And many of them are people from out of that state and out of that town that don't even live there. Mm-hmm. And it shows many people who live there are trying to defend their own homes. And so don't think that the black community is for looters. There are a lot of black people who are hurting and feel like their voices have not been heard. And yes, they've shown that frustration in ways they probably shouldn't have. But majority of the black leadership and the black community are not for that. We don't want to see our own city burned. Right. We've worked hard to be able to own the very things they're burning down. Right. And so that's not what we want. But we are encouraged to see that our white brothers and sisters, before I got here, one of my friends who's a pastor back at the town just came from, watching him and so many people march downtown. Mm-hmm. And just in a solid, peaceful protest to make sure that our voices were heard, to know that we are here and we're ready for a change. So it's been really cool to watch.
Yeah, and I'm watching the protests, and I'm seeing, obviously the media is going to go for the best image, and so they're going to publish a lot of the fires and the looting and all that stuff, the tear gas, all this. They're going to go to that, and then that gets posted on somebody's Facebook page. Can you believe it? And then that's when the comment section descends into these thugs, these animals. By the way, before I finish my thought, don't call a human being an animal, especially if you profess to be a believer. I've seen so much of that. That is so antithetical to God's creation. Like that's offensive to me. I hate that. But what I'm watching everybody respond to it. It's like, well, what do you expect? The two Olympians, Tommy Williams and I can't remember the other guy's name. They protested at the Olympics with the fist in the air. Peaceful protest. They got their medal stripped. Mm-hmm. Colin Kaepernick had a peaceful protest, kneeling during the national anthem, and now he's blackballed by the NFL.
And was a lot of flack.
Yeah,
a lot of people burned Nike jerseys and everything else.
Yeah, and so peaceful protests have been tried. Yeah, and there's been
backlash.
And there's been backlash to this. So now it's like, well, we'll give this a shot. And guess what? There's backlash. And so the message that we're sending when we respond this way to protests is keep your mouth shut. Yeah. Stay quiet and accept your place in this world.
And as a black person, you feel like there's nothing I can do or say that will make a difference. Right. And so that's the hard part, is that if I do this, you tell me I'm wrong and I'm ignorant and I shouldn't do that. If I do this, I'm wrong and I'm ignorant and I shouldn't do that. If I do this, you're like, well, what do you want me to do? And it's so frustrating because you're like, what you're saying is you don't want to see us rock the boat or to rock the narrative that you want to have planted. Right. You want something totally different. And that's the problem that we see in our country.
Our time on Instagram is coming to a close. We're pushing an hour here, which is fantastic, and we have just a little bit more to go. So if you're watching us on Instagram, head over to the YouTube page to finish it up. It's MZBC Youth. Make sure you go there and find our live stream there. We have just a few more questions I want to get to. Let's get into the what now situation. So how should the gospel impact how we see these current events? What do you think?
I think as believers, we first have to understand that, and you talked about this earlier, that as believers, we understand that every single person is made in the image of God. I mean, we're image bearers, right? That's what we are. We're made in the image. And if that's the case, then we should see every single life, no matter the color. We should see that as precious, and we should see that as a reason to fight and to preserve that life.
Right.
And it's so easy, I think, because of the world we live in, to become cynical, to become numb to death in general. And you basically, look at the news, right? You can go from 5 people being murdered, and be like, hey, 5 people died tonight on this so-and-so street. And coming up next with sports, and we just are conditioned to treat death as another part of the 5 o'clock news. And so when a human life is devalued, it's a scary thing, because now you can care less about that life. Somewhere along the line, that police officer in his life, but devalued human life in general, and also devalued a black life to the point to where even with people looking at him saying you're killing him, his mind was so twisted at that point, his heart was so hardened that he would not even value that human life enough on camera to get off of his neck.
And his coworkers
did nothing. That's the point where when we talk about, how people are viewed, we talk about biases and everything like that. Those are examples of how it has morphed people's minds so much that the human life is not valued as much anymore. And so as Christians, we have to first understand that the human life is valuable, and we're made in the image of God, and we should hold every single life precious. And that's talking to us as well. Because it's easy for us to hear about some bombing in a third world country and to say, man, that's sad, and keep on moving about our day.
Yeah.
And so we have to value every single human life, not just American life. There's other parts of this world that are not in America that their lives are just as important as our lives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the thought that if the gospel is true somewhere, it has to be true anywhere. And so the gospel is true everywhere. So when the gospel says your life is valuable, the gospel also says the black life is valuable, the Muslim life is valuable, the Hindu life is valuable. And so I love thinking about that. Like the gospel is, if the gospel is true somewhere, it's true everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so I love that. But thinking about that too, how we see ourselves through the gospel, like we are, the gospel says we are sinful people saved by grace. It doesn't mean that once we're saved, we become perfect. We go through this process of sanctification. So we are gospel-believing Christians. We know that our ultimate goal is to look like Christ. Mm-hmm. And so that means that, number one, we recognize that we are not like Christ right now. We have sin in our hearts. And number two, we go on a deep dive through our hearts and find those dark places of our hearts where we struggle with sin. And that includes those sins of racism, mm-hmm. whether or not they're overt or covert. Mm-hmm. If they are sins of commission, where we are actively being racist, or sins of omission, where we are allowing racism to flourish. Those are sinful areas of our heart. And so as gospel-believing Christians, I think that's a place where we have to go. We have to say, all right, maybe I don't have this all together. Mm-hmm. What do I need to change about myself? Do some self-examination. Mm-hmm. What do I allow? Have I found myself clutching my purse a little tighter whenever I'm walking past a black person? Do I find myself doing whenever I see something about that a black person is doing that I don't like, that makes me unhappy? Do I spend a lot of time cheering for the black athlete on the field, but in my heart say I would never let that person date my daughter?
Oh my goodness! That's the greatest. I'm so glad. That's the greatest litmus test. Is when who you are out there. You say black, white, whatever. If my daughter or my son brought home somebody of another race to marry, how would that make me feel? Mm. Not what you would say publicly. We're good at faking it. How would that make you feel in your heart?
Yeah.
And if that makes you cringe or makes you feel uneasy, you to check your heart and understand that you have some things inside your heart. Because we're very good as keeping people from a distance, love people from a distance. Right, the great tweet that's been going around on social media has been, I grew up in a town where they praised me on the football field but wouldn't let me date their daughter. And that's so true. Like, people, you're great. As long as you can produce and you can run fast on the football field, make jump shots and all this stuff. But until I'm able to become a part of your family, that's when the real trust and closeness has to come in. Because I don't want to just be your brother and sister in Christ. I want to be your brother-in-law. You know, and can I be your brother-in-law is the question. Yeah. And so, is your heart open enough, or is your heart so full of love that somebody who doesn't look like you're fit into your little box could become a part of your family, the most intimate part of your life, your family, your inner circle? How would you feel if somebody of another color did that? That's a great litmus test. I love how you said that.
Gosh, I mean, and we know that is an issue today. I mean, you talked about your family earlier. We know that there are other families in our sphere of influences here that are dealing with that right now, where they've said, you know what, because you married a black man, you're no longer part of our family. Like, we know about that, and it is heartbreaking to see. And so as Christians, no matter what sin we're talking about, we always need to practice self-evaluation. Yeah. Where in my life am I falling short of the glory of God? Yeah. But particularly at this moment, let's take an extra hard look at
this particular issue.
Yeah,
that's good.
The gospel necessarily changes how we see people, and it necessarily changes how we see ourselves. Necessarily changes how we view events. Like, we have to view these events through the lens of the gospel. When we see hurting people, then we should hurt with them. When we see people in pain, we should feel that pain and try to alleviate that pain. And that's something that's been weighing heavily on my heart, is how am I as a gospel believer going to respond to these events?
So what now? How do we move forward, right? Like, I think a lot of times, we don't want to just beat people up and leave them like, well, my life is terrible. I'm a terrible person. So what do we do, right? Like, as Christians and as white people, watching this video, or black people watching this video, how do we begin to move the ball forward? Yeah. I think more now than ever, we have people on the same page saying, I'm ready to see change. Something has to change. So what do we do to begin to make that change? And so I think there's a few steps I can give you on the front end. This is Racial Reconciliation 101.
That's right.
I think the first thing that you have to do is speak up and speak out about racism. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, when you see or hear racism, you call it out. Yep. And so it might rock the boat with your family, because a lot of people may come from families that a lot of you who went through generations and generations of racism, who parents have told you or grandparents have told you, you can be friends with that person, but you better not bring them home, or all these. You see that person over there, we don't talk with that person. So a lot of people have grown up with that, and a lot of older generation people are set in their ways at this point, right? And they say things without being checked, because they are only surrounded by people who will encourage or allow that thing to happen. And so as a Christian, as a believer, your job is to call out that racism, even if it's going to rock your boat a little bit. Yeah. I mean, the Bible says, no greater love than this, that you might lay down your life for a friend. And so you may not lose your life with your family member, but you may lose some respect with your friends. You may lose some friends. You may lose some family members. Right. But it's your job, your duty as a Christian, to call out racism when you see it. And I think that's the first step, is calling out racism.
Jonathan Pokluda calls it, says obedience doesn't depend on the outcome.
Yeah.
And so you say what needs to be said no matter what. And losing your life may not mean losing your physical life, but it may mean losing your livelihood. Yeah. Can you still be obedient even when that's the risk?
Yeah. If you know your company is not hiring people based off of biases, simply because that person may not fit into the mold that they want, when in reality it's the color of their skin, are you willing as a Christian first to call that out? And that's something we didn't talk about or didn't mention, but like, we have to understand as Christians, and going back to talk about as a gospel-centered Christian, that we have to understand that who we are Christians first, and our race second. And we have to be careful to make sure that Christianity is the adjective and not the noun, because if we make Christianity the noun, then our Christianity is defined by our race first. But if we're a Christian, I'm a Christian who happens to be black. You're a Christian who happens to be white. My race is defined by my Christianity. My Christianity is not defined by my race.
There you go.
And the moment my Christianity is defined by my race is the moment that I will begin to only view things from a gospel perspective that applies to my race,
Yeah.
or will keep my race comfortable. But when we're Christian first and a race second, then everything that we do leads with our Christianity, and then everything else follows second.
Yep.
So I see Jesus first, and I see my race second. So if I'm a Christian first, even if I'm working with all white people, if I'm a Christian first, whatever God says first is what law is, and then whatever else, my culture comes
Right.
second.
Right.
And so we have to make sure, like you said, that even if it's somebody that our workplace, our friends, our spouse, we have to be able to call that out, even if it's going to cause a temporary division or a permanent division, because that's what God has called us to do. Call it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the second thing that we have to do after you call it out is educate yourself and your family and your children. If you're older, you have kids, or if you're younger, one day you're going to have kids. Educate yourself, educate your friends and your family on the history of our nation, the true history, not the textbook PG-13 version, but the rated R version that many black people and many white people had to live out. The R-rated Christian version of America that we live in. And you have to also educate yourself and your family on the current issues.
Yep.
Get your head out of the sand, like you talked about,
Yep.
and which the church has done a good job of doing a lot of times. And we'll bury our head, have our holy huddles, and say, Jesus, come rapture us, and we'll be fine. We'll let the world do their thing. Take your head out of the sand and look at the issues that are going on in America currently today. I love this quote. It says, what are you doing to make sure your children don't murder my children?
Ooh.
You know, what are you doing to make sure your children don't murder mine? And so, and that goes on every side, you know, because there are angry black people who don't, you know, teach about positive things that the white people have done, and the white demon is all they see. So what are you doing to teach your kids and educate your kids about the things that have happened in this nation, in society, and in this world in the past? The good, the bad, the ugly, to make sure they understand without any smoke in the way, everything that we've done. So make sure you're educating yourself. So that's the second thing. There's only 4. The third thing is diversify your dinner table.
Yeah.
Diversify your dinner table. Begin to live in close proximity with people who don't look like you. You will never be able to empathize deeply with someone or a group of people that you don't know.
That's right.
As long as that person is just a population statistic in another country or another state or another town or another house, you will never truly empathize with that person. It's only when that person becomes a part of your life and a part of your family that it really becomes personal to you.
Yeah.
And so I can say that's true for a lot of people. I know, you know, I was the first black staff hire at Mount Vernon. And so that means that a lot of people, a church part, have went to church with people who look like them their whole life. You probably only heard white preachers who never really had a relationship with a black person. And so for them, me coming here and them living in close proximity with me, taking me out to lunch, having hard conversations or having conversations about my kid and my life, and I became a black man, became a part of their family. It's when things like this happen and they stop saying, oh, what black people are going through, this is what Brandon is going through.
Right.
And so when they are beginning to step across that line and think outside the box, that when I post something or I say something or I talk about something from the stage, I'm showing them something from a different cultural lens. I'm showing them that, man, I didn't know you thought like this. I didn't know you had to live like that. And so only when we're living and diversifying our dinner table, having people in our life that don't look like us, that challenge the way we think, that aren't just saying yes to everything that we say, and challenge us to think differently, to make us see a different group of people in a different way. It's only then when we begin to have a life that reflects what that empathy looks like.
Right.
And so we have to diversify, get people in your life. If you only have one black friend, if you only have one black coworker that could potentially be your friend, you take, hey, I just want to buy you coffee.
That's right.
Can we just go have coffee? Let's just talk. Let me get to know who you are. All right. Like, just begin to make those steps that will allow you to grow with other people who don't look like you. And I promise you, you'll begin to see that people in that race in a different light.
That's right.
And so make sure you're diversifying your table and hanging out with people that are different. The last thing you got to do this is the next step is we have to learn how to lament as Christians. Now, if you don't know what lament is, pretty much just mourn.
Yeah.
And that's biblical. Like there's a time to mourn, and the Bible talks about lamenting, and when things happen, right? I think about David when his sons were killed, or his son died, or sons died. He would rip his clothes, and he would go and mourn, or he would go and pray to God, and have that time for him to mourn and just have those things. And I think somebody said it today. I was watching a sermon, and he said that 95% of our songs that we sing in church, our worship songs, are songs of conquer and victory. And like 5% of them is about lamenting. And so what we're doing is we're setting up in a Christian culture that everything is victorious. We don't know how to take defeat. Right. We don't know how to mourn when things aren't going right. And so we're creating a culture to where when everything's not bubbly, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to react. Right. And as Christians, we have to understand that mourning and lamenting is biblical and is key to us growing and loving each other and doing that. We have to learn. We don't know how to sit in the ashes and mourn with each other. Yeah. When everything is burnt down, we don't know how to just sit there, wrap our arms around each other, and just cry together. Yeah. And we're always good at saying, just don't say, Jesus, God's got this, and just keep praying about it. The right thing at the wrong time is also wrong. You say the right stuff at the wrong time is a bad thing. And so you have to be careful to say that, hey, our black brothers and sisters, we know you're mourning. Yeah. We know you're hurting. And we don't know what to do to fix it, but we love you. We want to be here and cry. Let's cry together. Yeah. Let's figure this out.
There's a pastor at my parents' church in Indianapolis. His name is Mark Vrogop, Vroegop. He's written a lot about lament lately. He wrote a book about lament and has written lots of blogs and articles about it as well. He's one to look up. Let's think about other resources real quick as we close.
Sure.
One of the books that I want to recommend is Woke Church by Eric Mason. Eric Mason is a pastor in Philadelphia, and this is a fantastic book. Ligon Duncan, who is the Chancellor of Reformed Seminary in Jackson, he wrote one of the forwards for this. John Perkins wrote a forward for this.
Anything Eric Mason writes, check it out.
Yeah,
it's going to be solid.
Eric Mason is good. He's a good Twitter follow as well. Movies that I would recommend: 13th on Netflix. Speaking of crack laws,
my goodness, watch 13th on Netflix. It will change your life on systemic racism and bring a lot to like a little bit of what I talked about and a lot more. Oh my gosh.
And just when we recommend these movies in this little section right now, and even Twitter feeds here in a minute that I'm going to recommend, they are not always church safe. Yeah. They're not always family appropriate. But our world is not necessarily family appropriate. This issue is not family appropriate, and so I think it's good to open our eyes to things that make us really uncomfortable. So 13th is one of those. It is a tough watch, but it's a good watch. Just Mercy is Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx are in that movie. Yeah. It's about a wrongfully convicted man on death row and the mission to get him freed. They just announced that it is going to be free on most streaming platforms. I know Amazon Prime has it for free right now. 13th is on Netflix. Just Mercy is on Amazon Prime. You had another movie that you want to recommend?
Yeah, so a movie, like I said, parents, you might want to watch it first by yourself, but it's called A Time to Kill. Older movie with Samuel Jackson, Matthew McConaughey,
John Grisham.
Yeah,
wrote it, right?
Yeah, and it talks about basically the story of this little black girl who's walking home from the store, and these white men pretty much raped and beat her and left her for dead, and the trial that ensued after that in the Jim Crow South, and how race plays into those things that happen. This is, it may not be based on a true story, I'm not sure, but it's something that's happened time and time again. So it's something that's very real, and something that's a great history lesson for you. So a few more books. One to go with 13. That documentary came from a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. So if you're more of a book person, or you want to look at both, watch both, look at the book. The New Jim Crow is a great book There's a book called White Fragility. I haven't read it yet, but I know a lot of my white brothers and sisters and like people in ministry have really been raving about that book, and so I can't wait to read it. White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. It's a good book. The Color of Compromise is a great book that I've been working through. It talks about the history of race in the church, and kind of paints that picture of history of how racism and divided the church and things like that. And actually, I found this out. There's on Amazon Prime. There's a docu-series that goes along with that. So if you're more of a video person, watch the documentary. And then the last one I got is The Cross-Shaped Gospel by Brian Laritz. Just talks about the vertical relationship with Jesus and the horizontal relationship with other people, and just talks about how we as Christians are called to live vertical with Jesus first and then horizontal with each other. And Brian Laritz is a phenomenal pastor. He's like my ministry hero. Created a multicultural church, a huge multicultural church in Memphis. Moved to New York for a few years, and just left a church recently in Palo Alto in California, one of the largest multicultural churches in the nation. And he is his heart, his passion is multicultural churches, and so which breathed life into me and my passion. And he gets race and he understands it. He's going to come at it head on, and it's a great. So, The Cross-Shaped Gospel is a book I highly recommend as well.
Yeah. One last thing: diversify your news feed, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you're getting your or cable news. Don't just get everything from one source. And something I started doing on Twitter in the last couple of years is diversifying my Twitter feed, and so started intentionally adding people of color. Brian Laritz is one that I would recommend as well. He's a great Twitter follow. Ben Watson, former tight end for the Patriots and Saints. He's a fantastic follow, believer, outspoken on these issues. Great guy. Kyle Howard is a pastor as well. Carlos Whitaker, former worship leader, now speaker and author, living in Nashville. He's great. And then Lecrae is one of my favorite Twitter follows as well. So make sure that not everybody in your news feed looks like you. And make sure if you're watching news on TV, don't just stick with one channel. Don't just stick with one newspaper. Read a lot of different viewpoints, because not everything is fake just because you don't agree with it. Just keep that in mind.
The rule of thumb is if every time you get on social media, you don't leave upset, or if you agree with everything that everybody posts on your news feed, then you probably don't have a very healthy news feed. If people don't challenge your judgment or your rule of thinking, then you're probably not having a diverse news feed. And you got to do that, because everybody shouldn't be thinking the same way.
That's right.
And if everybody is, then probably you're not growing, you're not being challenged. So become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Become comfortable with being challenged. The way you think, the way you view things. If you're a Republican, get some people who are Democrats or independent. If you're a Democrat, get some people who are Republican on your news feed to challenge your way of thought. Because I promise you, Republicans are not the devil, Democrats are the devil. They're all Christians who have different beliefs.
That's right.
And so we have to challenge our way of thinking and have open conversations. And don't be those people that say that if you don't agree with me, I'm deleting you. That's the dumbest thing ever. And if you're always saying you're just going to cancel people or delete you, you're never going to grow. And nobody's ever going to be able to challenge you. You're never going to be able to take criticism. And you can't be a Christian and can't take criticism.
Yeah. We can talk about cancel culture for another hour. So we're gonna bring that to an end. Is there anything you want to? Did we miss anything that you want to talk about?
Man, I think we covered. I think we did a good job of trying to make sure I look over my notes and make sure we hit everything. Talk about all lives, never talk about all that stuff, systemic racism. I mean, guys, just thank you for listening. I think you being here shows that you want a difference and you want to change. And so we want to say thank you for that. And hopefully this is the start of many hard conversations.
Yeah.
And just because race may be the issue today, maybe one day this won't be the issue. And and we are able to move on and focus, which we will. I don't think we're just talking about race as Christians. We have other areas of sin and things we have to deal with as well. But wouldn't it be great to have one less issue that we have to deal with, that we can focus more on another issue with all of our heart and all of our soul? And so, I like to look at it as, there's different forms of cancer. And just because there are different forms of cancer doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a team working on this form of cancer to find a cure or whatever. But what happens is when you find one cure for one cancer, then more people can focus on another cure for another one. And so let's attack this head on. Let's show the world as Christians. We should be on the front line of showing people what heaven is going to look like, which is a tribe of every tribe, every tongue, every nation singing the name of Jesus. And so we should do that on earth. The Bible says, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so we should be able to try to get glimpses of heaven here on earth.
That's right.
And that's being unified racially, and then being able to go out and show the world as Christians that something that the world says is impossible, we're able to do it because of Jesus Christ.
That's right. That's right. I love that. I'm not going to add anything else. That was a great way to end. Let me pray for us, and we'll be done. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. We thank you for this time that Brandon and I could talk about racism, about what it's like to be black, because I have no idea what that's like. And so, God, I just thank you for his honesty, for his willingness to share stories from his past that might still sting, and then share his thoughts on what's going on in the world right now, and how that impacts him, and how it impacts his family, impacts the future generations. God, we are sinful people, and this is the one of those ways that sin is manifesting itself is through racism. And so, God, I pray that as Christians, as believers, that we would open our eyes to that demon inside of us, and God, that we would work with the Holy Spirit to eradicate that from our lives. God, open those dark recesses of our heart. Help us to see where we are falling short of your glory in regards to our racism. And God, help us to seek healing and seek reconciliation with our brothers and sisters of different races. We love you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank y'all. Have a great night.
Boom.
Go to the next screen.